In Sheltered, you control a family who survive the apocalypse in one way or another. There are 2 scenarios to try out, which have end goals and an endless survival mode. In Scenario 1, Stasis, you control a family of 4 who comes out of a cryogenic stasis. A scientist kidnaps/save them, and now he expects these awakened parents and their 2 little kids to save the entire human race. How are they supposed to become saviors? By grabbing a bunch of materials to fix a rocket, making the rocket components, and then taking off with as many human embryos and books as they're able to find. In the meantime, they'll also need to fight mutants on the world map as they gather those things, mutants above the base who wander by, and mutated worms inside the base who randomly pop up to destroy their vital, unrepairable power source. In Scenario 2, Surrounded, you control a family of 3 who are under threat from violent people on the surface. The goal is to keep the mother and son alive while the father scours the map for useful items. To keep them alive, the player will need to reinforce the 2 entry doors and make several traps. Any raiders who pass by these defenses will need to be killed in combat. If they're not killed, then they'll steal supplies and possibly kill the mother and son in combat. There are also boss fights, and bosses zip through the traps with murderous intent. Endless mode is just what it sounds like. Keep people alive endlessly, until you get bored and eliminate their universe, of course. The RV can be fixed up and new shelters can be traveled to, and the difficulty's supposed to get harder after every move to a new shelter. Realistically, on either easy or normal difficulty in endless mode, I think that it'd be difficult to have a TPK once you know how the game's played. After all, as with most survival games, the hardest part is earlier on. Managing resources and creating new items is harder because the various buildable stations that make life easier just aren't made yet. Once they are made, then survival needs tend to become pretty simple. Because of this, I think that endless mode likely would be endless on easy or normal difficulty. However, on both hard and hardcore difficulty, the challenge level seems more like a hassle than challenging. This is because rainfall becomes rarer and the maps are very large. While water doesn't matter for travel in the scenarios, it does matter in endless mode. The exploration party is water dependent and must have enough water to travel, or else they can't even start to venture out. The amount of water required depends on the distance traveled. Add on the fog of war mechanic, and survival truly becomes a matter of a tedious time sink in both hard and hardcore. It's going to take a long time, because what's going on here is a triple whammy. Water is so limited that traveling in any direction has a ridiculously high cost, because water's not just required for exploration. It's also needed for drinking, showering, and the toilet need bars for each family member and recruit. Worse yet, the large map means large gaps of nothing. It's easy to wander over empty areas, return empty-handed, and have done nothing other than waste water. Even when buildings are found, then you still probably won't get what you need. And while traders do exist, their inventories are random and small. So even if you find traders in buildings, then trying to build specific things is still a big time sink, unless you get lucky. To guarantee survival, you'd have to go slow, expending water only bit by bit when exploring. Going slowly means that a player would just have to build water containers, watch the PCs complain and mess themselves like the miserable Sims that they are, and then when rain finally comes, explore, hope for the best, and try to reserve some water for drinking. Then rinse and repeat. It's doable, but it would take a long time. Meanwhile, the majority of the game would need to be spent watching the PCs pop up depressed speech bubbles. I tried these difficulties out briefly just to see what they were like. Then I checked out online guides to see if my guess about how they were a time sink was right. My guess was confirmed, and to me, that doesn't sound like a fun time. The gameplay. There are 3 speeds in the game. Caps lock will slow things down, there's normal speed, and holding the left shift button will speed things up. As you gather items on the world map, you can also run into mutated animals and people, which initiates combat. Not every encounter is with a mutant, though. You can also sometimes encounter normal people, and avoid combat through either dialogue or fleeing. In endless mode, trading and recruitment are also possibilities when encountering normal folks. However, you can only choose one thing, and then they run away. So for example, if you trade with someone, you can't also try to recruit them. Combat can also happen on the surface if mutated people wander by. Expeditions can't leave if there are enemies on the surface, and so enemies do need to be cleared out if they decide to stick around. But random surface combat only occurs in the stasis scenario and in endless mode. All of the combat in the surrounded scenario is scripted. Combat can happen inside of the base too. In the stasis scenario, random combat happens in the base because mutated worms are attracted to the power source. This also means trying to speed up time time with the shift key is kind of annoying because even when not much is going on, you have to constantly scan for these worms. In the surrounded scenario, combat happens in the base too because raiders inevitably do break down the doors no matter how well they're reinforced. Endless mode also has raiders in it. But no matter which mode you play on, Sheltered is primarily a gathering and crafting game, as most survival games are. And gathering items in the game and then upgrading and crafting items in the base isn't difficult. It also isn't very fun in this game. To gather items, you simply visit buildings on the map, and then what's there will pop up in a slotted box. You just click what you want. That's not very interactive. Plus, everything on the map is mostly repetitive. Houses, small office buildings, and so on. The basic crafting system is standard. Just follow the recipes in each tier and you're good. There's no experimentation, no mini-games, nothing unique, no sense of adventure. It's all just straightforward and common stuff for a survival game in a very bare-bones format. There's not much to it. This means that there's little sense of exploration, mystery, or adventure. But, of course, when it comes to crafting recipes in a survival game, the biggest problem is finding the specific materials that you need. For example, you may find plenty of metal, but not enough wires. A recycler helps with this, and in the stasis scenario, so does the item fabricator. And if you do well in that scenario, then you also unlock the item fabricator for use in endless mode. That thing will make whatever you want as long as you pay. Every item has a salvage value, and you can basically trade it your junk to get almost whatever materials you want in exchange. Obviously, that means that the thing's very handy. No more hunting around for a single switch or whatever. Just take and bake. It makes crafting much easier. However, while there is such a way to make crafting easier, that still didn't fix the fact that finding items just wasn't that fun. Many games have some interactivity to find things. You can smash pots, hit blocks, open crates, whatever. Wandering toward buildings and then either choosing items from a menu or grabbing all of the items on that menu wasn't fun. This isn't to say that bland elements like that can't work in a game. Bland elements can work just fine if there are other things going on that are enjoyable. The problem was that everything else in the game was pretty bland too. There was just nothing that entertained me much. No deep story, the scenarios are simple, and the endless mode really has little story beyond simple survival. No lovable characters, there's very little personality there. Even in the scenarios, what characters say is simple, uninteresting, and they don't speak often either. Meanwhile, the other mechanics in the game were also simple, such as combat. You have one weapon slot per character, one armor slot, only one good vest as an armor choice, and a very limited set of abilities. Combat is turn-based, it's unexciting, and over hours and dozens of fights, the dullness sets in strongly. On the harder mode, raids are frequent, which also means that combat is constantly happening. It's also worth mentioning that as characters level up their stats, they don't get additional abilities. There's no skill tree or anything like that. I did read that higher charisma means that characters can trade with someone easier, but it's not like you get a leg sweep or something like that as a character levels up dexterity. As I said, it's pretty simple. Combat also has some odd quirks, which I disliked. For example, if a PC gets the bleeding effect during combat, then they'll gradually lose HP. This stat effect continues after the fight too, but if you fight on the surface or in the base with bandages in the character's inventory, then those bandages will immediately teleport back into the medicine cabinet after the fight. This means that if you ended the fight with low HP, then the PC can bleed out and go unconscious on the way to the base's medicine cabinet to get the bandages that they just had teleported out of their hands. Yet on the world map, a character can hike back while bleeding and not die of HP loss on the way. They'll just start losing HP once they're back home. I had that happen several times during this stasis scenario. As for traps, they're also rather simple to make use of. Raiders have to take a straightforward path because there's only one entrance and exit, which means that deciding where and what traps to place is easy because there aren't many traps to choose from, and they're also limited by tiers, so at the beginning, you can't really even place that many different ones anyway. Lastly, it's also worth mentioning that there's no user-controlled save system in the game. It's one of those games that auto-saves at some points and saves when you quit. Some people like that, some people hate it, so I figure I should note it. The scenarios each allow for only one save. The endless mode has 3 save slots, which allows for 3 games to go on at once, but you can't save one playthrough at different points there either. The look and the sound, The look of the game compounds the tedium too. Its pixelated graphics are okay, but they're not impressive. The game's less pretty than other survival games with similar mechanics too, such as This War of Mine, Help Will Come Tomorrow, Dead in Vinland, etc. Sheltered came out in 2015, and so this was a design choice, and not a limitation of tech. If there were a better story, great combat, or some other redeeming features, then I don't think I'd mind how it looks. A great game doesn't have to have great graphics, and throwback styles can work fine. However, because the game seemed very bland to me, its simplistic style added to my boredom. It was hard to overlook that it both wasn't fun to play or nice to look at. Plus, sometimes the graphics looked outright stupid. For example, it bothered me that when enemies died, then they just stood there. Other than a brief notice stating dead, which floated off after a moment, there was no indicator of the death. That was bizarre to me. Even in older games, really older games, enemies' bodies at least disappear. Their freezing in place looked strange and stagnant. The music is okay but simple. The total soundtrack is about 36 minutes long, and there are only 11 songs. Most sounded similar. 3 of them sounded livelier than the others, and they're for combat. I thought that the combat music was pretty good, but otherwise, the music just blended into the background. Final thoughts. Both scenarios were easy and pretty dull. Endless mode wasn't better. The stories in the scenarios were simple, and in every mode, the characters were flat. Meanwhile, the game's various mechanics seemed bare-boned. There just wasn't much to the game. And in retrospect, I'm not sure who this game was made for. It doesn't have a lot of player engagement. There's no stealth system, no mini-games, the exploration's flat, one armor slot means little stat customization, and so on. The combat's simple as heck, too. Overall, it seems way too simple for anybody who's played several survival games and is used to greater complexity. Yet, despite the game's overall simplicity, it also has an option for cannibalism. Fallen enemies can be harvested for meat, and so it's not exactly a family-friendly game for little kiddos who might enjoy less complexity either. As for me, I obviously wasn't a fan. I've played plenty of survival games, and Sheltered didn't surpass or match any of them in any way. For example, Help Will Come Tomorrow has a similar map mechanic and dull exploration, but it looks better, and while the characters have little personality and background details, they do at least have some. The same can be said for Dead in Vinland, and other games have even more to them, such as This War of Mine, allowing for more dynamic combat avoidance. The player can make a PC run away instead of just clicking escape. The player can also run and hide while exploring, and I could go on. My point is that I didn't see any area in which Sheltered stood out as trying more than these other games, or on par with them. It just seemed very, very bare to me. Whenever it did have something to it, such as the PCs crying out about their needs, then it just reminded me of other games, but also paled in comparison to them.